So now that we did add environment variables, before we get to deployment, it's time to do a test build on our local machine and see if we're happy. And for this, I opened the terminal again, and now I want to run this build command, which builds our application for production. And if we run npm run build, this production optimized build is being produced, and we also get useful information shown to us here. We see, for example, which pages are built for the server, which pages are 100% static, these with the empty dot here, and which pages are dynamic but were statically pre-generated. And we see that output here, and that's all looking good. We get the starting page pre-generated. 404 was added for us automatically. Contact page is 100% static because we don't fetch any dynamic data here. And then we got posts and the post detail pages, which were also pre-generated. But here we see an issue. This is red because this posts detail page, these pages are too big. They contain too much JavaScript. We could deploy it. It wouldn't break. But this is a clear indicator that we might be doing something in those pages which is not optimal. We might be shipping too much code. And very often that means that you're using some third-party package, some third-party library that is too big. So therefore, before we deploy something, let's fix this issue. And for this, let's have a look at the detail page. Now this slug page here is certainly not too big. It doesn't have a lot of code. We also can ignore any code which is only needed in getStaticProps or getStaticPops. That code will only execute during the build process and on the server anyways. That will never end up on the client, and the code here, this size, refers to the client-side code. So we can ignore server-side code. So this component should be fine. Therefore, let's explore the post content component. Here, we also don't have too much code on our own, but we are using a couple of third-party packages. React Markdown and this syntax highlighter. And now you would have to dig into those packages and find out how big they are. And I can tell you that our problem here is React Syntax Highlighter. This is huge. If you visit the React Syntax Highlighter GitHub repository, then you actually find out that they tell you that it's quite big and that they offer a light build because the React Syntax Highlighter can have a fairly large footprint. But the solution is simple. We can use the light build basically as it is described down there. The difference between the light version and the version we're currently using is that this version, out of the box, supports syntax highlighting for all possible programming languages. That might sound nice, but it is quite redundant and it adds a lot of JavaScript code. In reality, we are probably not going to include C++ code snippets here if we are blogging about web development. And hence, using the light build and explicitly stating the languages we want to support is probably the better choice here. And that's what we can do. We can also import the styling in a slightly optimized way. So therefore, what I'll do here is I'll import Prism Light as syntax highlighter instead of Prism. And I'll import my styles differently by diving into style/prism/Atom Dark and then importing Atom Dark like this. This will also only import that style then and no other styles. And now we need to import the languages which we want to support. And we do this by importing from React Syntax Highlighter /dist/cjs/languages/prism/ and then we have different options like JavaScript, for example. And then we could import this as JS, whatever you want. And we could, of course, also duplicate this and, for example, also import CSS if we want to support this as well. And you can simply add all the languages you want to support. So all the languages which you'll use in your code snippets typically. Then you just need to register those languages simply by calling syntax highlighter register language, and then the identifier, for example, JS. That's the identifier which I also use in my markdown code here. So we need to import that identifier. And then as a second argument, that imported language. And I'll repeat that for CSS here. And with that, we should have a much lighter footprint. If we now run npm run build again, with those changes applied, it will build our site again and produce all those files again. And now we'll see that this is much smaller. It shrank from 320 kilobytes to 114 kilobytes. And it's also worth noting that these sizes are before compression. But Node.js will compress these files. So once they are served, they are much smaller. And therefore that should be fine. Now let's also test if that looks good though. So let's start the dev server to see if our changes broke something. And go to posts, and then that post which has that code snippet. And that still looks all right here if we have a look at it. So that is working. Now we have that syntax highlighting, but with a smaller footprint. And that's why checks like this are important, and why you should always validate your code and see if you can improve it. And even here, you might find other third-party packages which have an even smaller footprint. You might find different ways of highlighting syntax. There might still be ways of improving this even more. But we already gained a lot here, and we now have a size that's okay. And therefore now with that, I think we're ready to actually deploy this.